quality of ambition and she has that quality of concern for that child, then it is no surprise that Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan became a ruler of the world. It is no surprise that Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan became Amir al-Mu'mineen. It is no surprise that Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan became one of the khulafa of this ummah. And so, the self-worth that we instill in ourselves and the self-worth that we instill in each other is very important. The Prophet ﷺ, he took, guys, like he's just touching books. It's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a distraction. Really. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ, he developed, like we mentioned yesterday, he developed the Sahaba of Rasulullah ﷺ, and we spoke about some of them. We spoke about Bilal in particular yesterday. But I wanted to speak about, there's a technique that the Prophet ﷺ used to increase the self-worth of his companions. People who thought they were losers, people who thought that they were worthless, people who thought that there was nothing that they could offer their communities. The Prophet ﷺ continued to raise their self-worth until he made them a Saad. He made them leaders. He made them have incredible character. And how did he do that? One way that I want to look at very quickly is that the Prophet ﷺ, he would not allow for themselves to be belittled. So the Prophet ﷺ, he says, بِحَسْبِ بْرِئٍ مِنَ الشَّرِّ أَنْ يَحْقِرَ أَخَاهُ الْمُسْلِمِ. It is enough of an evil that a person belittles his Muslim brother. Meaning that if the only thing, mashallah, you guys prayed Maghrib in the masjid. That's great. You guys might pray Isha in the masjid. Fajr in the masjid. Dhuhr and Asr. So a person might have fasted today because today's Thursday. And so they think to themselves, they've done a great job today. You know, you really done well. You really worshipped Allah Azza wa Jalla. So the Prophet ﷺ says, بِحَسْبِ بْرِئٍ مِنَ الشَّرِّ أَنْ يَحْقِرَ أَخَاهُ الْمُسْلِمِ. Meaning that if the only thing that you did today, if everything that you did was great, but the only thing that you did was that you said to your brother, you're ugly. You said to your sister, you're so stupid. You said to your wife, you're so stupid. If that's the only thing that you said, if the only thing that you say to your brother, man, you're so fat. You're such a loser. These things that we say and we don't really pay attention to it, the Prophet ﷺ said, بِحَسْبِ بِرِئٍ مِنَ الشَّرِّ أَنْ يَحْقِرَ أَخَاهُ الْمُسْلِمِ. It is sufficient of an evil that a person belittles his Muslim brother. If that's the only thing that you did. Why? Because belittling your brother is so damaging. It is so destructive to the character of that person. It is so weakening to their own resolve and so weakening to their own strength of character that when you weaken your brother and your brother in turn weakens his brother, then what do you end up having? You have a weak ummah. You have a weak community. And a weak community is not going to fulfill the obligations that Allah Azza wa Jalla has placed on it. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. The weak ummah is not going to take its place amongst the other ummah. And so the Prophet ﷺ, what he would do is he would take away all of the sources of weakness from this ummah. And of the sources of weakness is the perspective that people have. And so one example that I want to give you, and there are many examples of this, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was not destined for greatness. He wasn't born into a noble family in Quraysh. He wasn't born into a noble tribe. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, so Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, he wasn't born to a lot of wealth. He wasn't born to any of these things. Not only that, but he wasn't physically intimidating or physically talented for him to be amongst the strong. He was a shepherd boy, and he was very short. He was described that when Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was standing, he was the same size as Umar ibn Khattab, who was sitting. And so Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is climbing a tree. And you guys know this story. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is climbing a tree and the wind begins to blow. And the Sahaba see how skinny his legs are and they start to laugh. And the Prophet ﷺ, he then says, أَتَضْحَكُونَ مِنْ دِقَّةِ سَاقِيهِ, are you laughing due to how skinny his legs are? Those legs are going to outweigh the mountain of Uhud on the Day of Judgment. Those legs are going to outweigh the mountain of Uhud on the Day of Judgment. So being skinny, for a person who's skinny, is a cause of having low self-esteem. And the Prophet ﷺ took that cause of low self-esteem from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and he flipped it. He told him that those legs on the Day of Judgment are going to outweigh the mountain of Uhud. Those legs on the Day of Judgment are going to be extremely heavy. They're going to be extremely heavy on the Day of Judgment. And so Abdullah ibn Mas'ud will come down from that tree with his head held high. He will come down from that tree feeling that he is someone who's worth a lot. And so those very legs had the audacity to step on the neck of Abu al-Hakam, Abu Jahl, at the Battle of Badr. And when Abu Jahl sees, because he was in the throes of death, when Abu Jahl sees that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is stepping on his neck, he says, you have climbed a very high place, Ya Ruway'i al-Ghanam. You little shepherd boy, you're climbing something big. But the Prophet ﷺ, he wasn't intimidated by the fact that he was standing on top of Abu Jahl. The Prophet ﷺ had raised Ibn Mas'ud to value himself. He raised Ibn Mas'ud to have a lot of self-esteem. So this the Prophet ﷺ did over and over again. There were so many other companions, ibn Akhtab, Bilal ibn Rabah, Ammar ibn Yasir, and so many other examples that exist with regards to self-esteem. But we don't want to spend too much time on that. We have our guest speaker, inshallah, Sheikh Saad. So the first thing that I want to request is that everyone who's sitting in the back to move up to the front. And everybody who's in the middle to come up to the front. And everyone who's on a wall, you're only allowed to sit on the wall if you legitimately have back pains or are tired, or that's it. But other than that, the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, as was taught to us, is أسند ركبتيه إلى ركبتيه. He places his knees at the knees of the Prophet ﷺ and seeking knowledge. خير إن شاء الله.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وسيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته ومن اكتفى بهديه إلى يوم الدين وبعد. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. So the talk is called, you guys know what it's called? Mirror, mirror on the wall. Who's the fairest of them all? Right? Do you guys know that there's like a nursery rhyme or something? Yeah? Okay. So basically what we're talking about today, inshallah ta'ala, is our self-image and our image of our body and how society looks at it and what the Islamic perspective of it should be. Physical fitness, being in shape, where do we stand as Muslims? Now, one of the first things I want to talk about, and one of the most important points for us to understand, is that Islam, walillah alhamd, is a complete religion. Meaning Islam tells us how to lead our lives. And you won't find things, issues that we face on a societal level, which Islam doesn't have answers for. So we're going to take things a step at a time. So inshallah ta'ala, we're going to start with the Islamic perspective simply on health and fitness and things like that. So if you look through the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, what you realize is that the Prophet ﷺ clearly gave us a methodology or a way in which we should be feeding ourselves, and the way we should be eating, and the way in which we should be taking care of our health. So for example, we have the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he said that there is no vessel more hated to be filled than the stomach. And it is enough for the son of Adam to eat a few morsels of food to keep their back straight. And if they feel like they must eat more, then they should fill a third of their stomach with food, a third of their stomach with drink, and they should leave a third of their stomach to breathe. Now what you see here is the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ when it comes to our daily life, eating ourselves daily, and when it comes to our nutrition. So apart from that, you have a similar hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that the food of one is enough for two, and the food of two is enough for three, and the food of three is enough for four. Now what I always find interesting about this hadith is that I'm sure most of you here have probably heard this hadith. But if I were to ask you, when was the last time we implemented this hadith? People would say like, I don't know, maybe I try to eat less, right? And this is why I always tell the brothers, like, listen, you should be the one who's implementing the sunnah. Because usually people are shy, because you know what people are afraid of? People are afraid that you're going to look cheap. Like when you go out, people are like, oh, you know, I want to make sure I buy a meal for everyone, or if I'm paying for everyone. So you should be the one who has pride in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and says, you know what, there's two of us, let's order a single meal. And what you realize with this, and this is true with any time you implement the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, is what you'll realize is that you'll immediately have barakah in your food, in your meal. And barakah does a couple things when it comes to eating and drinking. The first thing that barakah does is that that food is actually good for you. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses that food. So that food is actually good for you. You're protecting yourself from many illnesses and diseases and things like that. Secondly, the food becomes enjoyable. So just an example of like having barakah in your meal. You may eat a meal which there's no barakah in, and you may not enjoy that food so much. Or you may be sitting with like a friend, or maybe sitting with like your spouse or someone, and because of a lack of barakah, one of the things that may happen is you may get into an argument with your spouse, or you may get into an argument with the person that you're there to eat with. If you have barakah in your food, you may come out of that experience and you're like, alhamdulillah, that was such an awesome meal. Because it wasn't about filling your stomach, it was about sitting there and bonding together over a meal. Right? Apart from that, and I want to quickly go through some of the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ where nutrition and food is mentioned. So apart from that, we have the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which is mentioned in Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, in which the Prophet ﷺ actually mentions some of the minor signs of the Day of Judgment. Now, what you have to realize is that when the Prophet ﷺ mentions the minor signs, even the major signs, but more specifically since we're talking about the minor signs, when the Prophet ﷺ mentions the minor signs of the Day of Judgment, they're never positive. Right? They're never like, oh, that's a good thing, we can't wait for that to happen. Right? So when the companions would hear the signs of the Day of Judgment, they would get afraid, or they would be like, okay, this is something that they don't want to see. So one of the signs of the Day of Judgment is that the Prophet ﷺ told us that obesity will become prevalent, right? That obesity will become widespread. And actually the companions, to them, this sign, like most of the other signs, it was something strange. Like they were actually surprised, like how is that going to happen? They were curious. So even with this, even like when the Prophet ﷺ said obesity will become prevalent, when we are hearing this sign of the Day of Judgment, for us it's like, yeah, you know, I guess, you know, that time is coming or whatever. It's not that shocking. But for the companions, it was actually very shocking. Because society at that time, there were very few people that were obese. There were very few people that were overweight. And even like when the companions, or when people at that time, they would see somebody who is overweight, they would think there's something wrong with them, something strange. So for example, you have the story of Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, when he was a Khalifa, he sees a man who has like a belly. Right? He's got a belly sticking out. And Umar says to him, he says, Ma hada? Right? He says, what is this? And this guy, you know, he's being a little cheeky or whatever. So he goes, Hada min barakatillah. Right? He says, this is from the barakah of Allah Azza wa Jal. And then Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, he says, La, hada min adhabillah. Right? He says, no, this is from the adhab of Allah. This is from the punishment of Allah. But as funny as this story is, the point I'm trying to make here is that it was odd. Like it was odd for people to see someone who was out of shape, who was someone who was fat. And the reason for that, and this is something that I actually talk about in my class, the fiqh of chilling, the reason for that is how society was back then. Society was a very physical society. And even like in the class, in the fiqh of chilling class, we go through like the sports at the time of Prophet and all the physical activity they had and all of that. So when you take a look at that, you realize that it was a very physical society. And subhanAllah, the other day, I was at the gym. I was in the weight room, and I was lifting some weights, and I looked around, and this really strange thought came to my mind. And you may think this is funny, but this is what actually occurred to my mind. I started looking at everyone. I was in the weight rooms. There's a bunch of like meatheads and stuff like that. They're like lifting weights. And, people were like, bench pressing and doing curls and things like that. And I said, subhanAllah, if the companions were to be alive today, or if they were to somehow see what we're doing right now in the weight room, what would they think? Right? So they would look at people taking like an hour out of their day or 2 hours out of their day, going to a weight room and like picking up weights and putting them down, right? Picking them up and putting them down, picking them up and putting them down. And they'd be like, what is going on? Like, why are you doing this, right? To them, it would make no sense because physical fitness for them, it came from just living life, right? People were, and mind you, the Sahaba, they were in shape, right? So if you think of people who are in shape now, and that's the other thing, now it's like the minority of people are in shape. So when you see somebody in shape, you're like, MashaAllah, brother, like you're in such great shape. That was, in the time of the Prophet, it was the opposite. When they would see somebody who's out of shape, like I said, that would be strange. So if the companions were to be here today, they would find it very odd that we take time out of our day to specially go to like this area, this room, right, where we're lifting weights and putting them down so we can get in better shape. And the obvious thought that would come to their mind, which should be coming to our mind, is why don't you just live a more active lifestyle? Right? I'm not saying like don't go to the gym or whatever. I totally understand that. But as a whole, right, the reason why we find ourselves in the gym, or one of the reasons why we find ourselves in the gyms or working out or on the treadmill or on the bike or whatever it is because we don't have an active lifestyle. Right? Our lifestyle is not active. And this is like one of the problems we see like in society today. That our lifestyle is a very, very laid back, we sit down and do everything. Most jobs now, most of us, I'm pretty sure, are not farmers or things like that. We have jobs where we sit down and work. And subhanAllah, I know like sometimes if you've ever spoken to like a UPS truck driver, I don't know if you've ever done that, but they have actually like a physically demanding job, and it's actually quite strange. Like people look at the UPS driver and they're like, wow, like your job is so hard. You have to pick up packages and put them in the truck and deliver them. And if you were to like rewind back to the time of the Prophet, that would be like the average person. Like it was not considered strange or odd that somebody had this job which was very physical. Like I said, that was part of life. Now, there's a famous statement of Imam Shafi'i, rahmatullah alayh, where when he's talking about eating food, and this is something the scholars have discussed in quite length actually, overeating and excessive eating and obesity and all of that. So Imam Shafi'i, and you may find this strange, right? But Imam Shafi'i said that I have not filled my stomach in 16 years. Right? He says, for the last 16 years of my life, I have not filled my stomach a single time. Right? He says, because when a person, and then he says, when a person overeats, it causes a lack of understanding. And I don't know if you know, but Imam Shafi'i is one of our great scholars. And if you hear stories about him, or if you hear about his life, you hear things like he had a photographic memory, right? That he would look at something and he would immediately memorize it. Like he wouldn't have to read it over again. He would take a glance at it and it would go into his memory. And even like they say, like if he was reading a book, he'd have to cover up one side of the book so he doesn't look at it and it doesn't get mixed in with the page that he's actually reading. Right? So this may seem like fantastical to us, right? Like how is that possible? Like it's so strange. Or sometimes people say like, oh, that was just that generation, right? We can't reach that level. The reason why we feel that way is because we're not putting in the work that generation put in. So if Imam Shafi'i said like, I haven't filled my stomach in the last 16 years, obviously that is a lot of work that he's putting in, right? So if we want to get anywhere close to the level of Imam Shafi'i, we have to be taking those steps. And if it seems fantastical to us that he had a photographic memory and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed him with so much knowledge, is because he actually strove for that knowledge. Right? He made sacrifices. And subhanAllah, I know like when people go on diets and stuff like that, a lot of times people hate diets. They're like, diets are terrible. They end up cursing the diet. Like they'll diet for like a week or 2 weeks and they're like, that was the most hardest thing I've ever done. And the reason why they feel that way is because during that diet they had to give up a lifestyle of excess. They had to give up a lifestyle of just eating whenever you wanted to. Right? And that's one of the issues that we're facing today, is we live a type of lifestyle where food is always available for us. Right? Whenever we need food, for most of us, especially if you're young, if you live at your parents' house or whatever, you simply take 4 steps, open the fridge, take something out and eat. Right? That's all you have to do. Or if you're driving or whatever, you stop by 7-Eleven, drive through McDonald's, or whatever it is, we're used to having food at our fingertips all the time, right? And that's one of the things that's caused us like become a really an obese society. The other issue that we're facing is food as entertainment, right? So food for us a lot of times is become a source of entertainment. And this is why I think like the fiqh of chilling class, I know I'm like talking about the class a lot, but understanding what your limits are, a lot of times for like, especially like religious brothers and sisters, they feel like their only source of entertainment, like they have nothing to do on a Friday night, they're like, let's just go out to eat, right? And it's sad that you see like the religious crew or the religious brothers that become overweight or out of shape because their only form of entertainment is non-physical. It's like eating, right? And this is the type of society that we live in where eating has become entertainment. And this is why, this is something they've started to say in the Muslim countries, but more specifically, I remember when I was in Medina in Saudi Arabia, one of the things they would say is, if you open up a restaurant, your business will never fail, right? Because people always want to eat, right? People are looking for new types of food. They're looking at new foods they can eat, something new, whatever, and that has become our source of entertainment and our pastime. Now, mind you, just to preface everything that I've said so far, we're not talking about people who are obese because of a medical reason, right? That is something that is not in their control. And فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, fear Allah to the best of your ability. What we're talking about, what I've talked about so far, is like eating too much. It's obesity because of gluttony and things like that, where, like I said, because it's the choices that we make, right? So we choose to live a life where we don't have that much physical activity. We choose to live a life where food has become entertainment. We choose to live a life where we eat just because like we're bored. We have nothing to do, so we'll just eat and things like that. In contrast, like I mentioned before, if you were to take a look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you'd see that the Prophet ﷺ himself, just like he was like the best human being when it came to his morals and his character and everything else, likewise, physically, he was actually the best of us as well. And actually, if you were to take my class, inshallah, I don't know how many of you are taking the class here, but actually mention some of the descriptions of the Prophet ﷺ where we mentioned how physically fit he actually was, and you would actually be surprised. And it wasn't just the Prophet ﷺ. It was actually all of the prophets. All the prophets that were chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they were all physically fit. So if you think of like Nuh alayhi salam, like he built the ark on his own. If you think of like Ibrahim alayhi salam, he built the Kaaba. Now if you were to, I'm sure most of you have seen the Kaaba. If you've seen the Kaaba, you can imagine that it was built with hands. It was like Ibrahim alayhi salam, Ismail alayhi salam, like they built it with their hands. That's not an easy task. Like I don't think, most of us with our hands would not be able to build something like that. It would indeed take a great amount of strength and a great, like you'd have to be physically very competent to build the Kaaba. Likewise, you have Musa alayhi salam, and we know like he was very, very strong. As we know, he pushed someone and that person died, right? It wasn't the intention of Musa alayhi salam to kill the person, but because he was so strong, the person died. Also, Musa alayhi salam, we know like the two women, or the two girls who were describing Musa alayhi salam to their father and saying, we should hire this person. They mentioned two characteristics of Musa alayhi salam. Do you guys know what those two characteristics are? Does anyone know? Yeah, al-qawi al-amin, right? They said, "Inna khayra man istajarta al-qawi al-amin." That the best of the person that you can hire is the person who is al-qawi, strong, and they are amin, they are trustworthy. And subhanAllah, even now, like if you look at like desirable traits when it comes to sisters, for example, like if sisters looking to get married, those are the two traits that they usually look for, right? Somebody who is physically fit, physically in shape, good looking, and that's like the physical aspect, and then you have the moral aspect as well. So somebody with good character, somebody's trustworthy with their deen and all of that, those are like the epitome. And this is why the prophets, they had the epitome of both high morals, high character, closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and even physically, they were the strongest. Our acts of worship also embody ihsan when it comes to physical fitness. So if you look at our prayer, the fact that we pray 5 times a day. I don't know if you've ever spoken to a non-Muslim before, and when you usually mention to them, like, we pray 5 times a day, usually they say something like, you pray 5 times a day? Like, that must be so difficult. And the reality is that for Muslims, it's not difficult. And if you pray your 5 daily prayers, right, if you are on top of your prayers and you take care of your prayers, and you happen to miss a prayer, that actually bothers you, right? It actually does something to you, like you're like, something is missing from my life, right? And that is what Islam embodies. Likewise, If you look at fasting, for example, fasting for 30 days, once again, when non-Muslims hear about fasting for 30 days, they're like, how do you guys do that? Right? That's like, how is it possible that you guys fast for 30 days? They're so surprised. And the average Muslim's like, yeah, it's a little difficult, but it's not that much of a problem, right? We do it every year, and it's totally fine. And even like, la qadar Allah, you were to tell them like, yeah, my kids fast too. They'd be like, child abuse or something like that, right? But the reality is that our kids fast as well, right? And this just is part of Islam, because built into Islam, there are certain acts of worship that are physical acts of worship. There's certain acts of worship that are monetary acts of worship. For example, our zakah. There's certain acts of worship that are physical acts of worship, like prayer, like fasting, like the Hajj. Making Hajj, for example, is a very physical act of worship. So if you were to look at Islam, like I said in the beginning, Islam is a complete religion. It's a complete way of life. So just as Islam pays importance to, or gives importance to our spirituality, Islam doesn't leave out the body. Right? And Islam very much understands, obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, that there's a strong connection between our spirituality and our physical selves. Right? And this is why you have a statement of Umar, for example, where he said that you should not overeat because it leads to laziness in worship. And it becomes hard for a person to make dhikr. Right? It becomes hard for a person to remember Allah Azza wa Jal. Meaning there's a very close connection between the body and the soul. Right? And a lot of times what happens is if a person indulges, like they don't take care of their bodies, no matter how spiritual they are, they'll see that eventually it will have an effect on their spirituality. Even if like they are somebody who makes the conscious effort to be as spiritual as possible, there are certain acts of worship, like I said, that if you're physically unfit, you just can't perform. Right? And it's just not the same. So somebody, because of their obesity, they may get diabetes or something like that, they may not be able to fast. Or somebody who becomes like overweight and things like that, their Hajj experience, for example, will be very different than somebody who is fit. And alhamdulillah, like I've made Hajj a few times, and I've seen it like with my own eyes. When I see people who are like young and in shape, their Hajj experience is very different than somebody who's like old or somebody who's like out of shape or whatever. Like even spiritually, you see that the body and the soul have a very close connection. Okay, so in a nutshell, that is Islam, like the Islamic perspective on eating and laziness. So we can say that Islam very much pushes us, our Sharia pushes us to be, to aim to be in our best physical state, right? To take care of our bodies, be moderate in the way we eat, etc., etc. Now, the other side of the coin, that's our religion and our spirituality and all that. The reality is we live in a society, right? And there's certain things that we have adopted from this society, and this society's outlook at physical fitness. So if you look at society's standards of what is considered being physically fit, or what is considered being good looking, or attractive, or all that, you see that one of the things we see is that they're very superficial, right? So for example, it's TV and movies and magazines and all of that, it's those things that dictate the standards of beauty. So you may have like a young girl, or even a young boy, but a young girl who watches TV and she watches movies, or she watches like whatever, or she reads magazines, and she sees like these women or these girls in magazines, and she believes that in order for her to have self-worth, right, that this is how she has to look. And the big problem with that is that it's unrealistic, right? Even like the pictures that we see in like magazines and stuff like that, this may be common knowledge to some of you, but they're Photoshopped, they're airbrushed. So even like that ideal that they show, it's not actually attainable. It's a goal which is not even possible. And this is why sometimes like if you look at tabloids and things like that, they'll have like a headline saying something like, this movie star or whatever, like look at them, how they look without makeup, right? Or look at them, they've gained 10 pounds, and they show like this really ugly picture of them, and people are like, oh my God, this person looks so ugly, right? It's so strange. The reality is that that's how they usually look, right? Because it's impossible to look perfect or look 100% all the time. But the issue is that a lot of times like people don't understand that, and they think that this is how they have to look. They have to meet those societal standards of what perfection is. And like I said, even like the irony of like movie stars and all that is that with all the time that they spend into like looking good, and like a lot of celebrities, their main purpose in life is to like just look good. Right? They have no other job. They just have to look good for their next movie or their next TV show or their photo shoot or whatever, they have personal trainers, they have tons of money, they have all this stuff, and with all of that, like a paparazzi like photo comes out every once in a while showing them like not looking that great, right? Because the reality is with all the money that they have, all the resources that they have, they still can't look perfect, right? So it's a very unattainable goal. And this is what you see, like a very superficial look at beauty. And alhamdulillah, one of the things that we know about Islam, alhamdulillah, is that Islam came to free us from this superficial look at beauty. Yes, we strive, we try our best to look good and to dress nice and wear the nicest clothes, right? We try to look our best, but we understand that there's no such thing as perfection, right? We understand that perfection is something which is unattainable, especially in this life, it's unattainable. So for us, alhamdulillah, Islam, for example, tells us that the best of us are those who are closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That is our definition of greatness or self-worth. Like our self-worth as Muslims is defined by how close we are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, we don't discount or put aside our physical beauty, right? For example, there's the statement of, I think it's Ibn Abbas, the statement of Ibn Abbas where he said that I like to look good for my wife, or I like to beautify myself for my wife, just as I like for her to beautify herself for me, right? So we're not discounting beauty and looking good. However, we do understand that in the end of the day, things like physical beauty are, in the end of the day, quite superficial, right? We're not, like I said, we're not discounting it, but we're saying that is not our goal in life. That is not our purpose in life. And the reason why people like develop a lot of disorders and things like eating disorders and things like that is because they make beauty and looking a certain way like their goal in life, like the most important thing they have in life. And this is why people, like I said, end up with eating disorders. People start taking like diet pills or whatever. That's why you have liposuction and things. All that kind of stuff happens because people feel they must look a certain way, right? And another one of the issues is what you'll find common is people who take that path, right, where they feel like they have to look a certain way. They have to represent themselves in a certain way. They have to fit a certain standard of beauty. A lot of times that happens because they have a gaping hole in their life. And that is what you call like the spiritual void, right? Because they are far away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have no spirituality. They have no connection with their Lord. That creates a void in their life. And a lot of times people fill that void with different things. Sometimes it's material things, right? In the fiqh of chilling, I actually talk about, I have a whole section on materialism, right? Because that's another thing that people fill that void with, is just buying things. Like if I bought more things, I'd be able to fill that spiritual void. The other thing people try to fill that spiritual void with is beauty and looking good. So they're like, I have to look a certain way in order to feel better about myself. And the reality is that no matter how good you look, no matter how beautiful you are, you can be like the best looking person ever, right? If you have a spiritual void, you're still not going to feel better about yourself, right? And this is what Islam came to teach us. That in order for us to feel complete, in order for us to feel content, in order for us, and as long as that stays missing, we can look as physically as great as possible. We can spend hours in the gym. We can spend like the rest of our life in the gym. We can take supplements. We can get surgeries. We can take diet pills. We can do everything in the world. But if we have a spiritual void, then we're not going to be happy. We're not going to be content, right? And likewise, us as Muslims, we have freed ourselves. Our religion teaches us to free ourselves from the desire of always wanting to be praised by others, right? One of the problems in this, living this superficial day and age is that we have, a lot of times we develop the need to be praised by others. So we define our self-worth by how much we're praised by others. And a good example of that is something like Facebook, right? Or Twitter or Instagram, things like that. Sometimes we post pictures of ourselves simply because we want to feel, we want to feel acknowledged. We want to feel like people think we're good looking, right? We want to get those likes. We want to get those comments. We want people to say, oh my God, you look so pretty. Or like, sister, may want, that's it. Like, so that desire, like that is the way I define my self-worth. That is where the problem lies, right? So in the praise of others or fitting a certain standard, when that becomes the goal, right? When we say like that's our definition or that's how we define our self-worth, it leads to spiritual problems and it leads to, like I said, a hole and a void in our lives. So what is our outlook on this issue? And I'm going to summarize, inshallah ta'ala, in a few points, our outlook on beauty and being in shape and fitness. First and foremost, we as Muslims, we understand that perfection is unattainable. And actually the perfection that we see, like I said before, the perfection that we see around us is actually not even real. Like the perfection we see on TV and movies and magazines, that stuff isn't even real. So number one, perfection is unattainable. However, as Muslims, this is point number two, that fact that perfection is unattainable doesn't lead us to give up and say, you know what, I don't have to take care of my body, I don't have to work out or do anything like that. You know, it just doesn't matter because I'm never going to be perfect. We as Muslims, we strive to do our best. And one of the reasons we strive to do our best is because we understand that there is like I said before, there is a close connection between our bodies and our spirituality, our bodies and our souls. Number three, for us there is a differentiating factor, right, between just working out for the sake of working out, or looking good for the sake of looking good, or looking good for the praise of others, or looking good to feel a certain to fill a certain societal mold. And that differentiating factor is our intention, right? So all of a sudden, if we have the right intention, that same action becomes an action of worship. And that same action becomes an action that is fulfilling. So a couple different things happen when we have the right intention. So let's say we dress up for the right intention, or we take care of our bodies for the right intention. We go to the gym for the right intention. We look nice for the right intention. A couple different things happen. The first thing that happens is we get rewarded for all that time we spent working on ourselves, right? So before, without the intention, if we were working out or dressing up or looking nice, all that it was all in vain, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala won't reward us for that, because our intention wasn't to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our intention wasn't to improve our spirituality or anything like that. Our intention was simply that we had to fit a certain societal standard. But like I said, if we make the right intention, now all of a sudden, all that time we spent working out, or all that time that we spent taking care of ourselves or beautifying ourselves, all of a sudden we get rewarded for that action. The second thing that happens when we have the right intention is that we bring barakah into the time that we spent on ourselves. So, for example, I'll give the example of like going to the gym. If somebody goes to the gym for the right reasons, they have the right intention, all of a sudden now there's barakah in the time that they spent in their gym, right? Barakah meaning you have the help of Allah Azza wa Jal. And a lot of times people, I know like brothers, for example, they try to get in shape, they'll go start like lifting weights and they'll start running and working out and eating healthy and all that. And sometimes people like get disheartened, they're like, I'm not seeing any results. And one of the things I always tell people is, have you tried fixing your intention, right? Who are you doing this for? Like, why are you working out? Are you doing it just to look a certain way because you want people to praise you? Or are you doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If you're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if you can push yourself to have that intention, you may see results a lot quicker. And that is what barakah can do when it comes to even like your workouts. And I know people don't think of that. People think of like barakah when it comes to money, when it comes to time. But even something like working out, you can have barakah in your working out. Lastly, what the right intention does is it makes sure that we're successful not only in this dunya, right, but in the akhirah as well. So all the time, like I said before, all the time that we spend working out, it didn't go in vain. We show up on the Day of Judgment, and the time that we spent eating healthy or all that, those difficult things that we went through, like we said before, it's not easy to like try to strive to be in shape and things like that. But all of a sudden, all that time that we spent, we see the reward for that in the akhirah, and we ask Allah Azza wa Jal that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us that on the Day of Judgment. Lastly, the last thing I want to mention regarding our outlook is that we must seek a balance. We must seek to be moderate in these matters. So even like I started off with talking about eating, we seek to be moderate when it comes to eating. Even when it comes to like working out and things like that, a Muslim looks at these type of things and they seek to be moderate, right? They don't want to be in a position in their life where they've gone into an extreme, even if it's in something good. And this is something that I discuss quite at length in my class, is that even good things can go into an extreme, right? Even entertainment or fun and things like that. Even something like working out or being in shape, or taking care of your body, even if it's for the right reason, even if it's with the right intention, we can go into an extreme. So that's the last thing, that as a Muslim, part of our perspective on all these issues is that we strive to have a balance in our lives. And in the end of the day, we understand that as a Muslim, we're not trying to be perfect, right? But we're trying to do our best. So you can take that as like your rule. If there's one thing you take away from this lecture, it's this: that we understand that perfection is impossible. That it's just not going to happen. However, we try our best, and that is what we hope that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala will reward us for. Allah Subhanahu wa Taala understands that we're not perfect, right? It's impossible for us to be perfect. But what matters with Allah Azza wa Jal is that we tried our best and we worked, and we ask Allah Azza wa Jal that when He takes our lives, that we meet Allah Azza wa Jal, happen in a time that we were trying our best, not only physically. I know we were talking about our physical selves today, but not only physically, but even with our spirituality, even with our worship, even with getting closer to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, even with anything in our lives, even with like obedience to our parents, or you taking anything in our lives, what we strive for is not to be perfect, is to try our best, right? Sincerely try our best and have the sincerity of intention. And ask Allah Subhanahu wa Taala that He grants us that death in which we are striving to get closer to Allah Azza wa Jal. And Allah Subhanahu wa Taala knows best. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Questions? Okay. Any questions?
When it comes to appearance, like let's say you have a sincere intention that you're doing it good for Allah, but where do you draw the line where it becomes too much? Like for example, the person wants to grow his beard, and he sees that the beard is not looking presentable to the people. Does he have like a leeway to kind of make it look nice? Is that something that you can do?
Okay. I'm like, the beard is a specific issue, so I'll just talk about it in general. Like I said, if for us, like we understand it goes too far when we're not happy because we're not perfect, right? Because we're striving and striving, and we're like, okay, I'm not happy. We keep working on it because we feel that we're not perfect, or like I said, we don't meet like the societal standards of what beauty or perfection is, right? That means we've gone too far. As long as we're trying our best, right? We try to look our best and all of that. That's where we need to be, right? That's what's required of us. Allah Alam. Anything else? Yeah.
Are there any books written in English on the topic of like health and exercise?
Allahu Alam. I have no idea. In Arabic, Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he actually talks about, in a few different books of his, he actually talks about like eating and being moderate in eating and things like that. Even if in different books, like books of Sunnah and stuff like that, you'll find different chapters dealing with the topic of eating and excess and obesity and things like that. A lot. Exercise, like I said, what you see, like especially in classical texts, is that it was strange for them to see people who were overweight, right? It wasn't like the norm. So it's not like, oh, this is a problem, we need to write about it. It wasn't really a problem. It's only in our time that's like it's become a problem. Even our times, like a lot of people don't even talk about it. Right? People are like, oh, it's okay, just don't worry about it. Even like I said, the religious crowd or the religious crew, even they're like, yeah, it's not a big issue. But in actuality, like I said in the talk, it is a big issue, and it is very much related to our spirituality. Wallahu alam. Anything else? Yeah.
How do we interpret the hadith in Sahih Muslim where Prophet says that Inna Allah Jamilun yuhibbul Jamal? What concept of beauty do we derive?
Okay, that hadith is part of a longer hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that a person who has the weight of a mustard seed of arrogance in their heart will not enter paradise. And then one of the companions, I don't recall his name, one of the companions said, Ya Rasulullah, what about, he said, what if we like for our clothes and our shoes to look nice? Right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that, Inna Allah jamilun wa yuhibbul jamal, that indeed Allah is beautiful, right? And He likes beauty. And He said, the arrogance that I'm talking about is to reject the truth and to, I forget the second part of that hadith. Ammar, do you remember the second part of that hadith? To belittle people and to yeah. So to look down on people and to reject the truth, right? So that's the full narration of the hadith. So what the Prophet is talking about here is that, like I said, we do strive for beauty. We do strive to look our best, right? Even like you take something as good and as pious as reciting the Quran. Even reciting the Quran, we try to beautify our voices. Right? Imam Bukhari, for example, he has a whole chapter in his book, and the title of that section is the merits of beautifying your voice and reciting the Quran. Right? But like I said, we don't aim for perfection because we try our best, but we know that perfection is unattainable. Wallah.
These are brother mentions the hadith that Allah does not look at your appearance but the heart. Is that the hadith that he mentioned?
That's a different hadith. That's a different hadith.
How do you correlate with what you're saying with the appearance?
Okay, like I said, like I mentioned in the talk, in akramakum indallahi atqakum, right? That with Allah Azza wa Jal, the best of you are those who have the most taqwa, right? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala judges us on the day of judgment, it's not going to be according to our shapes and our forms, right? So we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates some people to be better looking and some people to be less better looking. That's something which is not in our control, right? However, so Allah will not judge us according to that, right? Our physical, the way we look physically. But did we try our best to basically make the best of what we have, for example? Right? And like I mentioned in the narration of Ibn Abbas, where he said that I like to beautify myself for my wife, just as I like for her to beautify herself for me, right? So basically, trying your best with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. Allah. Anything else? Yeah.
You mentioned intentions. What are some, oftentimes this can be challenging in particular areas. What are some skills or maybe practices, labs that you can make so that you can ensure that you started something with sincere intention and that it continues to be sincere? Because
Okay.
intention may change.
Okay, one of the problems when it comes to intentions is, and this is something I think a lot of people, this is what a lot of people think when they hear when the topic of intentions or sincerity being discussed, is a lot of people, they think that when it comes to intentions, you're either sincere or you're not, right? That when you're doing an action, you're either sincere or you're not. There's nothing in the middle. The reality is sincerity is something that we have to struggle with constantly. Like we constantly have to be checking our sincerity, right? So the minute a person says like, khalas, I'm sincere, right? That's when they're in trouble, right? Because then the shaitan has got you. It makes you feel secure, like, oh, I have nothing to worry about. I'm sincere, right? Or the other extreme of that is when people are like, I'm never going to be sincere, right? So what's the point of even trying, right? What is required of us when it comes to our sincerity is that we struggle with it constantly, that we're constantly checking it, right? And that should be our test of whether we're sincere or not. Are we concerned about it, right? If we are concerned about it, that means, alhamdulillah, we're on the right track. We're working towards it. But the moment we're like I said, the moment we're like, okay, khalas, I'm never going to be sincere, or we say like, okay, I'm fine, I'm sincere, there's nothing to worry about, that's when we're in trouble. Allah. Anything else?
How come just doing normal, like physical, like kind of work, like this, even just like picking up stuff so related to like worshiping, like obeying Allah?
Okay, so when it comes to like being in shape and things like that, when I said or have the right intention, what we're talking about is some of the right intentions to have is, for example, if I'm in better shape, if I'm physically in better shape, I can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala better, right? If I'm physically in a better shape, then I will also be in a better shape when it comes to my spirituality. And once you have that intention, now all of a sudden you start getting rewarded for just picking up weights and putting them down, right? A lot of, yeah, go ahead.
The thing is that I heard that they say that the older people, when they stand for salah, they stand longer because they have more patience. So what you're saying about the body, how does it? Because the young people, they usually don't have that much patience when they're doing their salah compared to older people, and they stand longer because they're older. So it's still like with your ruh and your body, I'm still kind of.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I'm saying like that. What's your ruh, your spirit has to do with your body. You can be weaker, but your salah and your.
Okay, I think I know what you're asking. So you're saying, okay, what I wasn't saying was that if you're physically weak, it means you're spiritually weak as well. That's not what I was saying. I was saying that when you strive spiritually, then when you strive physically, then then spiritually you'll be stronger as well. So the old person who's weak, right? He's physically weak, but he's still trying his hardest, right? And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases his spirituality as well, right? So I'm not saying like, okay, if somebody is physically powerful, then they're going to be spiritually powerful as well, right? A lot of it does go back to our intentions, like I said, like why a person is physically fit, right? And all of that as well, a lot of. Anything else? Okay, خلاص. جزاكم الله خيرا. والله تعالى. Question, okay. Are we taking questions not related to the topic? Okay, this is it's not really related to our topic. But the questioner says, I'm a recent convert. How can I explain to my family the importance of modesty and covering up? Okay, the importance of modesty. Interestingly enough, even like Western society or in modern society, they're actually now figuring out the importance of modesty. And I was recently watching something where they were talking about how they did some studies at Princeton University, where in this study, basically what they did is they got a group of men, like young men who attend Princeton University, and they put them in a room and they showed them pictures of women with varying degrees of clothing, right? And what they were basically trying to see is how does it affect the brain. And what they came to find is that when the men looked at women with less clothing, like the less clothing a woman was wearing, the more the man viewed the woman as an object, right? Not as a person, not someone that you talk to and you reason with, and that you have to, deal with their feelings and all that. The less clothes that a person had on, the more, and this is not, Islam's not saying this, like scientifically, like they put wires in the brain and figure this out, right? So what they found out is that the less clothes a woman was wearing, right, the more the man viewed her as an object. And even like they say, like the reason why modesty, or the reason why women took off clothes, or like they started wearing less and less clothes, because they wanted to feel free, they wanted to feel in charge, they wanted to feel powerful. And what we're seeing now is that it actually does the absolute opposite of that. The more clothes that a woman takes off, the more power and control she actually loses, right? And she simply becomes an object for men. And this is something that Islam understands, right? And this is why part of Islam, modesty is such a big part of Islam. The other thing that I'll say to you, and this is deals with the bigger issue or the bigger picture, what you could tell your parents is that Islam, we believe Islam is the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Islam is the religion of our Creator. And our Creator knows what is best for us, what is best for society to function properly, right? And our Creator knows and understands, obviously, that modesty, not just with girls, but with guys as well, is very important for society to function properly, right? And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, He knows that. And even like I said, in our society, we see the effects of living in an immodest society where people take clothes off and walk around naked and stuff like that. We see the effects of that, and that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to avoid for us. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best.
Saad will be with us tomorrow for the Jumu'ah khutbah, inshallah, at 1:10 p.m. And he will be presenting at the NJ Dawah Conference in Whippany, New Jersey, inshallah, beginning tomorrow. There will be rides leaving from the masjid, inshallah. People need rides, but you have to let us know in advance, because the brothers will be leaving, inshallah, around 6 o'clock. Don't just show up at 6 o'clock. You have to speak to myself beforehand, or Muhammad, inshallah. Also, we're doing registration after Salat al-Isha, and tomorrow after Jumu'ah. We'll be continuing registration for the conference. If you show up on Friday night is free. If you show up on Saturday and want to register for the conference for Saturday and